Welcome, everybody. RobLive. We're back in the studio. It's getting a little warm here, Jim.
I know.
A little warm. At some point, we have to.
It means summer's coming, though.
No, I love it. Yeah, and as teachers, as educators, right?
Yep.
That means that our time is coming to put in some more hours here in the studio and get educated over the weekend and on the summer break. And so, in an effort to educate ourselves and to learn from those who've been successful in the past, we try to bring you guys the most accomplished individuals we can throughout the Central Valley and anyone willing to travel. By the way, if you're in Los Angeles, New York, anywhere around the world, our studio will be here for you. Right, Jim?
Yes, it's here and opened.
Yes, and so today we have a special guest, and I've practiced the name twice off camera, so I'm going to get this right. So welcome to RobLive, Terry Slatic, United States Marine Corps Major, retired.
Almost.
Oh, I almost got it. What did I miss?
Major Terry Slatic, United States Marine Corps, retired.
There it is. Major. Put major in front of everything I just said. Let's run it again. Major Terry Slatic, United States Marine Corps, retired. Did I get it?
Nailed it.
Bingo. Thank you.
This is where you do the microphone drop. You do the microphone drop. Okay.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So I always like to start from the beginning. We talked a little bit off camera about you started out in New York City, correct?
Born third generation.
Wow. New York City. What was it like growing up in the Big Apple?
Well, we didn't live there for long, but we visited family. We moved to New Jersey, as many people do. And then growing up, it was various stops in Northern California, back to New Jersey, and then Florida, and actually lived for a couple years in Europe.
Wow, what part of Europe were you guys?
Outside of Amsterdam.
Wow, okay.
So
did you speak a little Dutch or?
I actually did. So I clearly remember the Dutch words, one of my father's favorite foods.
What was that?
Whipped cream, which in Dutch is slagroom.
Slagroom.
Slagroom is whipped cream in Dutch.
Wow.
But there's a famous joke, a very famous joke about the Dutch language. And I will give you the example. The suburb of Amsterdam that they lived in.
Yes.
If you and I looked at it written, you would phonetically pronounce it Scheveningen. Okay, if you were a Dutch person, you would pronounce it Scheveningen. Scheveningen. And so that leads to this very famous joke that the Dutch language is actually not a language, it's a throat disease. Scheveningen.
I can hear that.
You get that. Okay.
I get that.
So
I was a little confused about that area because I remember visiting it with a group of kids as an educator, and some of the shirts said Netherlands, and then what was the other alternate?
Holland.
Holland. So how does that work?
In a practical sense, to an American over here, it's completely synonymous. If you're over there,
yes,
that would be like fighting words in some portions.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, that would be like going into Boston and telling them that Dunkin' Donuts coffee is terrible and you like Starbucks.
Those as fighting words.
That is throwdown time in Boston if you're with Boston locals.
Yeah.
Okay, they live for their Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And I say this from personal experience. I've observed this. The company I worked for before I went back in the Marine Corps, which we're going to get to,
yes,
is a Boston company. So I was back there a lot while I lived in Fresno.
Oh, okay. And you kind of learned the Boston.
Right. So one of a quotable of mine is I've been to 34 countries, 49 states, and 2 wars.
Wow. That's a lot of living.
I still think I got a little bit left.
No, you got a lot left, Terry.
Yeah.
And so through that journey, at any time, if something hits you like a word of wisdom that got you through a certain time, we'd love to have you share that with us. And so the traveling, was that due to your parents' occupation?
At least up until through the high school period.
Okay.
Okay. After that, it was all on my own.
Oh, okay.
But my father was a what's called a corrosion engineer. Like, think of that red paint on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yes.
That type of stuff. So very, it ain't paint if it's on that level and it costs, $50 a gallon. That's really not paint. It's actually, at that point, seriously, it's referred to as a protective coating.
Oh.
So again, it's just, geek level stuff. But he was an engineer, but raised in Queens. But very important part about, his lineage.
Yes.
He started with nothing. He started with as little as you can. He was literally a baby in a basket left on a doorstep during the Depression.
Wow.
Okay. Can we agree that it'd be awfully hard to start out with less than that?
Yes. During the Depression, on top of everything else.
Right. Just given up by a family because many families, it's not an atypical thing. You're an educator.
Yeah.
People just had no money, couldn't afford. A new kid popped out. We can't afford the other ones that we already have. And luckily, the Slatic family took him in.
Okay, that's where Slatic. Okay.
And so it was some immigrants from the old country. So whereas Slatic is a Yugoslavian name derivation,
Yes.
I don't have a drop of Yugoslavian blood in me because he was adopted by the Slatic family.
See. Wow. And so that's where he started.
That's with nothing.
With nothing.
And the family that took him in, Otto and Rose, who are gone now, but I knew in my early life, Otto was a machinist, blue collar, working with his hands, making ends meet. He would tell me the story.
Yes.
During the Depression, when it was awful tough to make ends meet, he made ends meet had a side gig fixing the Thompson submachine guns for the mobsters.
He worked for the mob.
No, he didn't work for the mob, but he had a side job that he was a machinist, and they had weapons malfunctions. The machine gun stopped being a machine gun and reverted to single action, which, speaking as a retired Marine, that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Okay. They would take him to Otto Slatic, and he actually recounted the story. He had some of their Thompson submachine guns, just like you see in all the movies of that
The one
era.
they call the Tommy gun?
The Tommy gun, the Elliot Ness movies. And some of the guys whose machine guns he was working on at the time, I think it wasn't the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, because that was a Chicago thing,
Yeah.
but they what do they call it now? They were unalived, by the opposing mob. So here he is in his basement with a bunch of dead mob guys' Tommy guns, and I go, "Do you still have them?" And he's like, "Hell no." He said, "What'd you do with them?" He said, "I'm not going to get caught with these things. I went and threw them in the river."
Wow.
But, you did what you had to do in 1934, 1933, or what have you. But no, he did not work for them, but he's a machinist. And, if you have a malfunctioning automatic weapon, which, again, in my Marine Corps life, it's like a machine gun that's a single-shot weapon is not a machine gun anymore, and they would have him work on their weapons. Wow. So that was Otto, and he lived with us towards the end of his life. So I got to know him more than a little bit.
Okay.
So moved around quite a bit during my father's corrosion engineer. But, back to him. So the Slatic family who raised him, they didn't have any money. It's New York City. It's the Depression. He's, it's a to say the least, a working class, neighborhood.
Yes.
So they didn't know anyone who'd ever been to college. So he got to college, and if you notice, I'm probably larger than the average bear physically.
Yes. How tall are you?
I'm 6'3". I was a little bit taller back then.
Yeah.
But he was a 6'3", 6'4" guy back in the day.
Was he also an athlete like yourself?
Well, he escaped from what he had because he could play football. So he ends up getting a football scholarship to the University of Georgia, and which leads to him getting his degree and his career and all that, or else he'd would have been a machinist in Queens.
Wow.
So
athletics was his way out.
Athletics was the way out. So anybody, you can't count on that. I mean, there's so many kids, and I raised a bunch of athletes of my progeny. And sadly, they got academically, squared away, but you run into so many kids who think that, or sadly their parents who like, oh, little Bobby, is going to be playing at LSU in 3 years, and then he'll be a draft choice into insert your favorite sport.
Yes.
And if you look at the numbers, have you ever looked at the numbers of, let's just use football, since
Yes,
that was
let's
my
use
sport.
football.
Okay, there's 1 million kids playing high school football right now.
Yes.
Okay, how many of them end up playing? The big college football used to be called Division I. Now it's called, I think it's FCS.
Yes.
It's division. It's the same thing, different name. How many kids are playing? Okay, well, let's do the math. There's 131 Division I / FCS colleges, and they each have 85 scholarship. So it's 130 times 85. So there's 12,000 kids who are playing college football. There's 1 million kids playing high school football, and that gets whittled down to 12,000. Well, let's whittle it down some more. Those 12,000, that's over a 4-year period. There's how many scholarships are going to Division I schools every year? Well, how about 3,000? So out of these 1 million kids playing high school football, only 3,000 of them are going to get a Division I scholarship in any given year.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you whittle it down. Well, my kid's going to make it in use the NFL as the example.
Yeah.
Well, how many people are on an NFL roster? Well, there's 53. Okay. How many teams are there? Well, it's 32. So in round numbers,
Yeah.
it's 1,500 people who make a living playing NFL football.
Wow.
So we went from 1 million to 12,000 to 3,000 to 1,500. Well, then it gets even worse. How many people who get make an NFL team every year for the first time? Because those 1,500 are not all first-year players.
Yeah.
There's only about 200 that make it every year. So from 1 million to 12,000 to 3,000 to 1,500 to 200. But my kid's going to be the one.
He's going to be the one.
No, how about you get your kid into algebra class? How about you get your kid into AP history? Okay, but sadly, the number of disasters, raising a couple of relatively elite athletes and dealing with their parents, it's like, go to school, okay, learn math, learn history, learn how to write, okay? But sadly, we're not seeing that happen as often as you would hope.
But I also noticed, Terry, that things are starting much earlier now as well, in terms of, like, for example, the football. What age did you start playing?
I started playing full contact football at 9.
9 years old.
I mean, there, which is really relatively standard, but there are places in the South, Georgia noteworthy, Texas noteworthy. They're starting them at 5.
Yes, I was going to say.
Okay, and I've got a number of guys that I played with in college that went on to the NFL. I had no aspirations. Theoretically, I could have had a shot. That was not what I didn't even go for it. I mean, I was an all-conference guard at Colorado State. By definition, I would have had a shot.
Yeah.
It did not. But the idea that these kids in many, typically southern states, Georgia and Texas, they're starting them at 5, and I have many dozen scores of guys that I played with in college that did play at least briefly. I mean, a dear friend of mine played 11 seasons. Guy was a roommate of mine in the football dorm, and he has sons. He's a couple years younger than me, and over the years we would discuss, well, are your boys going to play full contact football? This guy played 11 years. He says, the only way I'll ever agree to that is if one of them is choking the life out of me, and shortly before I lose consciousness from him choking me out, and maybe I'll give permission then, but not until then.
That's quite a scenario. What was his biggest?
Because they're all, think of the guys that you grew up watching playing NFL football.
Yes.
a whole bunch of them died in their 40s and 50s. Okay, the guys that I idolized, there were those great Pittsburgh Steeler teams in the 1970s. Terry Bradshaw was a quarterback. You've seen him, but their iconic. I was an offensive lineman. Their iconic center was a man named Mike Webster, one of the best there ever was. Dead at 50.
Are we talking about the concussion?
Well, you never. In his case, yes. But the thing about what's called cumulative traumatic encephalopathy,
CTE,
you're not able to definitively diagnose it until the postmortem, meaning you're dead. So, but it was the same thing with. I'm sure you're familiar as a California guy, Junior Seau. Okay, which they knew he was going through a lot. But you don't know that it's this CTE specifically.
Yes.
I mean, you can suspect it is, but until you do the autopsy on that. But there's an awful lot of guys that are going through the aftermath of running into people with your face 500 times a week.
Did you experience that as a Division I player?
I mean, I got, we call it dinged.
Yes.
Would be the term we use. Did you get dinged on that one? I've actually never been, bless you, I've actually never been unconscious.
Yes.
But I have seen stars.
Well, we Jim, I don't know what you guys call it. We call it getting our bell rung.
Bell rung was another one.
Yeah.
Getting dinged was, I
played high school, and I had but nothing like, I wasn't on the line. I was a receiver.
Right.
But there's contact every play when you're on the line.
If there's not contact, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
Wow.
So that was so I ended up in okay. Let's go back to walking the dog here. Began high school in rural Florida.
Wow.
Okay, and then
that's football country, right?
It wasn't known to be the center of the football universe then.
What year was this?
That would have been in the mid 70s.
Oh, the 70s. Okay.
Now we knew it was good football.
Yeah.
But now, for instance, if you're a college football coach, you have to recruit great players to keep your job as a college football coach.
Yes.
Okay. What's the number one place that you will be wanting to recruit players from? Florida.
I was going to say Florida, Georgia, Texas.
It's Florida, Georgia, Louisiana.
Oh, Louisiana.
Texas.
Okay.
I mean, there's more players per capita coming out of Louisiana because it's such a small state.
Yes.
Relatively. Then there's Texas and there's California, but those are massive states. So first 2 years in Florida, 5 guys on that team that I played with made it to the NFL.
Of your high school team?
Of my Florida high school team.
Did you guys ever lose a game?
No, because all the other teams had that too.
Oh, wow.
It was Florida high school football.
Very competitive.
And then during 10th grade, so spring semester, Dad comes home from work one day and says, "We're moving to Southern California." And I'm like, "Oh, hell no."
Friends
grew, cute Southern girls.
Yeah.
And multi-sport athlete star at the time was the largest high school in the state of Florida. How many kids are in a giant high school here in California?
I'd say 2,000 to 3,000.
Brandon High School in Brandon, Florida, had 6,000 kids.
That's a community college, and you were one of the main athletes on that campus.
So the school was actually not built for 6,000. So get ready as an educator for this one. So if the school was actually built for 3,000, how do you make it a 6,000 student school?
You double the classroom size?
Well, you can't. There's all kind of laws and people per square feet and teachers union.
Yeah.
All this. What they ended up doing was, we would call it in the military port and starboard. So they had 2 entire complete teaching staffs, 2 entire different faculties. Okay. So if you were in 11th or 12th, so we'll start with 9th and 10th. If you were in 9th or 10th grade, you went to school from 12:15, meaning noon, until 6:15 at night.
Wow.
Okay. If you happen to be in 11th or 12th grade, you went from school from 6 a.m. till noon. And then the teachers would swap out and the underclassmen would come in. Now, what that facilitated was if you were on a varsity sports team.
I was just going to ask that.
Okay, the varsity sports teams would practice in the afternoon while the underclassmen were in class. Except for those, the exception would be the asterisk, would be what if you were a 9th or a 10th grader who made a varsity team? Then you would be going to school from 6 a.m. till noon with the 11th and 12th graders. Which is
That was you.
That was how, it's a small group, but we had, we probably had 6 underclassmen, meaning 9th and 10th, on a giant, massive, and talented varsity football team. The other cool part, if you happen to be a cheerleader and you made varsity cheer, meaning you're a cute girl, you also then would be going from school from 6 a.m. till noon because your practice would be in the afternoon. Then, the awkward part was if you were playing junior varsity or freshman sports, they'd have to come in at 10 o'clock in the morning, even though school didn't start till 12:15, and they'd have football practice or cheer practice before school.
Wow, I've never heard of this type of schedule.
It really was not as uncommon as you would think. That's how they got it, because this was the school was built of a given size, but then you've heard of, we started what was called busing.
Yes.
Okay, and it went from a relatively suburban school to, we can't have a bunch of white suburban kids, so we are going to make it a 50-50 black and brown and white school. So all the kids, we were about 35 miles east of Tampa. So we're going to bus the kids from Tampa out there to this school. Well, the only way that we're going to fit them is to do that, what's called split session. So that was her. However, that all ended after 10th grade because Dad goes, "We're moving to SoCal." Where's SoCal? Southern California. I don't want to go. I made my father's life pretty close to a living hell, basically saying, "I'm not going." So then you were fighting the emancipation issue, et cetera. But ultimately, family won out and went there. But I did get some concessions. And, I said, well, I was already starting as a 10th grader on this team.
Yes.
So I want to go to a great football program. And so I had him concede that I could pick the high school in Southern California that I'm going to. And think of the chutzpah, okay, of a new 16-year-old. However, as a 16-year-old, I was 6'3", 230 pounds.
Wow.
And I'm going around and I'm interviewing football coaches to see if they're good enough for me to come play.
Well, that's a unique experience.
There was something, granted, that's arrogant, okay? And I probably had a problem with being a little bit arrogant, but I knew at that point, I knew my father had played college football. I saw guys every year from my football program in Florida going on to play college football, so I naturally assumed that was going to be in my future. So I'm going to find a program, and I did, and I largely based it on the coaching. Not that it was a Catholic school, not that it was in what city, whatever it was, but it had 2 co-head coaches, one of whom had been a star at the University of Alabama, and one of whom had been a star at UCLA. And I figure if these guys were stars at Alabama and UCLA, you know what? I can learn from these guys. So,
Yeah.
So I, was maybe a smidgen arrogant and had a lot of chutzpah, but I ended up, wanting and getting 2 very good high school football coaches who were able to help me get to that next level.
What was the name of your school?
It was in a town of Fullerton. You've heard of Cal State Fullerton.
Yeah, Cal State Fullerton.
And at the time, it was a sports school. Now it's completely unknown as a sports school. It's become an academic center. It's right across the street from Cal State Fullerton. It's called Troy, Troy High School.
Troy High School.
Right after 57. But back then,
Yeah.
it was a sports school. And,
Okay.
And then, I didn't go back there for decades. And then I would, take the kids to Disney. You want to see where Daddy went to high school? Because it's only about 8 miles from Disney.
Oh, that's really
So it's like, you want
Orange
to see,
County.
Yeah. So you want to see where Daddy went to high school. And hey, there's the table where Daddy would have lunch every day, because it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
It's just not a sports school anymore.
So I wanted to get a little insight from you, being a high school teacher, Jim as well. We know that confidence is a big issue for teens. Where did your level of confidence come from early on, that you were at the point you were interviewing coaches and dictating some of the terms of your decisions as a teen?
I would love to say that there's some super duper, really precise, well thought out answer, but it was simply surround yourself. I mean, I'm playing on an elite program as a 14, 15, 16-year-old in Florida.
Yeah.
So when you're around the best, well, why would you want anything less than the best? So, I guess the takeaway should be always surround yourself with the best people doing what you want to do. And, if you're with a bunch of, we had guys on that team, Rob, back then. This is the mid-'70s who were 6'5", 6'6", 240, 250, athletes and on and on. So, did I methodically choose that we were going to live in Brandon, Florida? No, that decision was made, but without my input. Dad moved us there when I was 9.
Yeah.
So that was not, it just happened to be a seminal part of my development, was moving to a place that, and again, were it not for the legislatures in Washington, D.C. and in Tallahassee, Florida, the state capital, coming up with the idea that, we need to have busing so that the schools are all racially integrated and all this. Were it not for that, it would have been some typical, bunch of suburban white kids playing football. It wouldn't have been this elite athletics center that it had become. So, in addition to surrounding yourself by the best people doing what you want to do, it doesn't hurt to be lucky as well.
That never hurts.
Doesn't hurt.
So now you're in Southern California and you're your senior, and now you're being recruited, correct?
And I'm a high school All-American according to the according to the Joe Namath Prep Sports Magazine.
Joe Namath.
Prep Sports Magazine.
Wow.
And so again, that
I didn't know that was a thing.
It was then.
Yeah.
I still got it. I still got it framed somewhere. It's like, there I am.
Yeah.
And back then, different than today. This story will bear no resemblance to the recruiting process of today.
Yes.
Now it's all social media and things like that. Back then, these college coaches would fly around and drive around and go to see you play football
In person.
and then the courting would begin. And they
would it be right after the game that they would approach you, or
they could? Or typically, they would do it at your school. Like the day bore the game. I mean, they would see the game, but, they're not going to probably go, I don't remember after the game, but they're going to see you, for instance, the head coach of your high school, would come pull you out of class, and, the coach from Arizona State is here, or the coach from, whichever USC is here and all that. And then you do the visiting, they'd watch you play. And obviously consistent with them being in the football coach's office, they've already pulled your transcripts. They already looked at your attendance and discipline record, because
how were your grades in?
I mean, they were nothing fancy. Actually, they were pretty mediocre, because all I cared about was playing sports. And I actually remember the guidance counselor calling me in at that point in your junior, senior year, and handing me the brochures for the trade schools to learn how to be a welder, a wall hanger, or whatever, because my grades were pretty mediocre. Then, however, we took the SAT, and they realized, oh, crap. I guess if he has a 2.7 GPA, but he has a 1450 SAT, he's probably smarter than the average bear.
Yes.
So that made up for the bad grades, as I'm sure you would know.
Yes.
But I was a very unmotivated student.
Okay.
But so you can be an unmotivated student, but you better get a hell of an SAT score.
There's the lesson.
Right.
So how did you eventually decide that Colorado was where you wanted to play?
Colorado State.
Colorado State.
Because
so Colorado's the Rams?
Colorado State is the Rams.
State is Rams, Colorado's the Buffalo.
That is correct. So I went on recruiting trips to some noteworthy places. I went on a recruiting trip to USC.
Wow.
Went on a recruiting trip to Stanford. And
Now, are these overnight trips or?
oh yeah, those are weekends.
Wow. And like they have a player assigned to you?
They have a guide to exactly. That's the way it is done.
Okay.
And so you are hooked up with a upperclassman who's a football player, and they show you campus life and very memorably, the parties at Stanford were pretty good. But one of the other functions while you're there with them, the elite teams, Stanford, USC, they have, you've heard the term training table, where the players dine. The players have a special place where they will go eat with good food.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you will dine with the team at training table.
Training table.
And so I clearly remember having training table with USC, and this was a national championship USC team.
Oh, that was the year.
And it was one of the years. And there's a USC alum, Fresno High and USC, an NFL guy. You familiar with that guy in Fresno, Pat Howell?
Pat Howell.
So,
H.
3 years older than me. So he went to Fresno High, would have been class of probably 76 or 75.
Okay.
And went to SC and was an All-American there, was the first pick of the second round.
Oh, wow.
And had a an excellent but not particularly long NFL career. And now he's in Fresno. He's in financial business. But so I've run into him a few times.
Does he remember?
No, of course not. but at one point, some years back, I said, we met a long time ago, Pat. He's completely befuddled by this. I said, I was one of those snotty 17-year-old kids that they made you sit there. He was not my guide, but he was sitting, because I'm an offensive lineman. He's an offensive lineman. So the offensive linemen that are on recruiting trips are going to sit with the offensive linemen at SC. And so I remember sitting, a couple of other All-Americans that happened to be sitting at the table with me, Anthony Munoz.
Yes.
Okay.
Cincinnati Bengals.
Right. The best there ever was. Okay. The best offensive tackle in the history of the game.
Wow.
Okay. So I'm sitting there, and then another one, All-American at SC, who played for the Chiefs for quite a while, Brad Buddy.
Brad Buddy. I
Okay.
remember the last one.
So I'm sitting there. Yes, I was one of those snotty 17-year-olds sitting there with you and Munoz and Buddy eating, and we're with some of Pat Howell's friends, and in Fresno, and I said, and I remember the menu. We're having Australian lobster tails,
And call it.
like those 2-pound. I don't mean the lobster.
I was
the
just
tail.
going to ask you about the food.
Yeah. I mean, the tail's 2 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah, but Buddy and Munoz and Pat Howell are all 300-pound guys, and they just been in football practice. So I said, I remember that in all of his
Lobster tail.
Australian lobster tails.
Wow.
And his buddies, at the moment are like, you guys are having Australian lobster tails on training table? And they're like, yeah. But he'd forgotten that because, he played in the NFL, and college becomes a little bit of a distant memory after you've reached that epitome, the mountaintop, if you will. And I reminded him of some of my memories of that day. And again, I don't hang out with Pat Howell, but I've run into him in town, several times. But it was great.
Okay, so it begs the question: given that experience, why wouldn't you choose USC?
Pat Howell was 6'6", Munoz was 6'7", Buddy was 6'5". They wanted me, SC. I'm about 6'3.5" at that point. I'm a center, okay? And they wanted me because in high school I played center. And they thought, I was right at the cutoff, height-wise, for that. I wasn't willing to put all my eggs in that one basket. And, I knew I was probably pretty good.
Yeah.
But I would rather go someplace, how shall we say, a little bit smaller. and start away. And I've had more friends in Fresno who are Stanford grads that are like, so you turned down Stanford, one of the finest educations in the world? Yes, I did. And
USC,
now that's a little bit different reasoning on the Stanford one. One of the reasons why, Rob, you go to a school, yeah, there's the tradition and the LSU or the USC, but you also go for the coach.
Yes.
Okay. And the coach at Stanford then was future Hall of Famer Bill Walsh.
So you would have played for Bill Walsh.
So, well, I would have played for Bill Walsh for a year.
Oh, because he left.
Because he left after that year to go to the Niners.
Wow.
And so the highlight of the recruiting trip, okay, truly, in my opinion, the highlight is the recruit is going to have a one-on-one with the head coach in the coach's office. That's
unique.
That's right. So here I am, 17 years old, with Bill. I mean, yes, he was Bill Walsh, but he wasn't Bill Walsh.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget, he's kicked back in his chair. He's got his feet up on the desk with his blue ostrich skin cowboy boots.
Oh, I've never seen those.
He's a blue ostrich skin cowboy boot. But the media was already talking about, he's getting courted by NFL teams already. So inevitably, you'd be a moron as the recruit to not posit that question.
Yeah.
Right? So as I'm having my 30-minute one-on-one with Coach Walsh, I said, Coach, you read the paper every day. We keep hearing that a bunch of NFL teams are talking to you. He goes, and I never will forget this. He goes, Terry, my wife and I have bought the last house we're ever going to own. We belong to this whatever country club it was. He's a golfer. This is the last, because the only country club I ever want to play at. It's the last house that I'm ever going to live at. So take that however you want. It says, I'm never moving from the home I have, and I'm never leaving the country club that I've joined. And Rob, he didn't lie to me.
Wow.
He died in that house. Okay. He just happened to be working for the 49ers at the time. So
it's a different commute.
You get just commuting in a different direction. Okay. So I get, that's a giant takeaway. Okay.
Yeah.
I am not questioning his ethics or integrity. He didn't lie.
He didn't.
But be astute enough to understand the question that you're asking the guy, and then see, is there some wiggle room that he's leaving in his answer?
I am impressed that the 17-year-old was that prepared for that conversation.
Well, as I said, I did have a 1450 SAT.
Yeah, you did.
So I am smarter than I look.
No, you're sharp.
I am smarter than I look.
So I wanted to ask about how football and college then transitioned into a military career.
I don't know. Well, what I think transitions best into the military, especially the Marines,
yes,
is I was also a wrestler.
So multi-sport athlete in college, or?
No, they wanted me to wrestle in college.
Okay.
And I had scholarship offers to wrestle in college. But the way we look at it back in that era,
yes,
the 4 best wrestling schools back then were Iowa, Iowa State, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. Now there are others.
Yeah.
But back then, if you didn't go to those 4 schools and you wrestled at Stanford or UC Davis or what have you, those teams took buses to away games. Okay, that's just the economics of college sports. Unless you were at the Big 4, Iowas and the Oklahomas.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're playing Division I college football, you're flying.
You're flying.
So that was a big portion of the discussion. So now, wrestling is the most brutal sport out there. I don't know if you've ever been around wrestlers.
Yeah, at a younger age.
Okay. The elite wrestler. College, obviously in Central California, we've got some elite high school wrestlers.
Yes, we do.
Okay, but those guys, if you've been an elite wrestler, you know what it's like to suffer through a 4 or 5 hour practice and then an hour and a half of conditioning, because you're willing to do that.
And then the weight loss as well, right?
Well,
to make weight.
now that's the one aspect I never had to worry about because I, as a heavyweight,
Oh, okay.
did not have. I never had. Now, when I was a young wrestler,
Yeah.
9, 10 years old, then I did have to do that. I remember having to lose 20 pounds as a 10-year-old.
Oh.
Okay, so, but then when I got big and then I'm wrestling heavyweight, that was never an issue after that. But to me, I honestly have never come to terms with why the high school wrestlers, the good high school wrestlers who are not going to wrestle after high school, why they don't go in the Marine Corps, the most physically demanding of the military services, because you've already proved that you can suffer. Okay, and you already proved that you're disciplined. Okay, but now some guys do, but I just don't understand why it's not an automatic conduit.
Yeah.
So to me, football was this. So, okay, let's go to the college ends. And that would have been, I got my diploma in August of 1983.
What was your major in college?
Economics.
Economics.
Okay. So an event took place in October of 1983 that changed the trajectory of the world. You're a lot younger than me. Do you have any idea what that might have been?
1983. October. Jim, help me out. Change the trajectory
of the world.
1983.
I'll give you a hint. Beirut, Lebanon.
Oh, yes. Well, what is that? What do we reference that event? Isn't I always Beirut?
The first big truck bombing, 241 dead Marines.
Oh my God.
Okay.
That's right.
So I thought we were going to war.
Yeah.
And I went down to the Marine Corps officer recruiter because I had a degree. I don't have anything against being a corporal or sergeant, but if you have a degree and you were a college athlete, they like that
a
lot. So I signed up and went to what's called officer candidate school.
So you were that moved to take action.
Absolutely.
Wow.
But the path, the training to become, in my case, an infantry officer, from the time you get to your first officer candidate school to the time you get to your first unit in the real Marine Corps, the non-training environment.
Yes.
That's a year.
A year of training.
Okay. Meaning to include officer candidate school and then all the other schools. So by the time I got to my first unit, a year's passed. And President Reagan at the time decided that we were not going to war. And so I served out my contract, had a blast, went around the world twice, had a blast. But the peacetime military, I don't know if you've spoken on this topic to other veterans.
No.
When you do, look at this question. What are the differences between the peacetime military and the wartime military? Because they're not the same. Yes, you have uniforms on and you have to show up at a given time at a given place with equipment, but the resemblances after that begin to get a little bit vague and sparse. So the peacetime military is too much inspections and I guess I'll say this too. Practice, and never know that you're never going to play a game.
Yes.
Okay. So then in 1988, my contract is up. I said, thank you. It's been wonderful. Bye-bye. And I'm out. But you should be asking yourself, Rob, but that doesn't make you a major in the United States Marine Corps retired, does it?
No.
Right.
But I kind of felt like this was not the end of your military career.
Well, it was at that time. And in any practical sense, it was. So I went into industry, and that moved me with a corporate relocation to Fresno in 1990.
Oh, so that's how you end up in the Central Valley.
By a big company that I worked for that moved me here. Got married here, had a bunch of kids here, worked for, essentially 3 different companies over the next 18 years. But then, so that was 1988 getting out, 1990 moved here. Then obviously, I'm sure you recall 9/11.
Yes.
I'm a New York native.
So after 9/11 is when you, wow.
Well, no, 9/11 is when I thought about it.
Okay.
But the rules and regulations in the United States Marine Corps are sacrosanct. If you have been out of uniform for 7 years or longer, or you're 35 years of age or older, no, you can't come back.
I didn't know that. Did you know that rule, Jim?
Those rules are bulletproof.
So,
Okay. Well, they're bulletproof until somebody waives them. And so let's get this chronological thing.
yes.
So on 9/11, I was 41, way over 35.
Yes.
And by that time, I'd already been out for
Way over 7 years.
13 years.
Yes.
So the war progresses, and I'm watching things, and I just had my spidey senses telling me this war is going to go on. This war is going to keep on going on. And I've always stayed pretty fit. Then you started seeing some stuff on the internet and in chat rooms and things like that in that 2004, 2005 period that we're going to do what was called the surge in Iraq. That means they needed an extra 25,000 Marines to throw into Iraq. Okay, that was General Petraeus, if you remember that name. Well, the Marine Corps is pretty small. It's the smallest of all the services. I'm not
I didn't know that.
Oh, my, yes. The Marine Corps, if you look at the entire U.S. military,
Yes.
the Marine Corps represents only 16% of the people in the United States military.
I don't know why. In my head, it was one of the largest. Because they have such an impact.
We have a big footprint.
Yes.
But it's only 16%.
Okay. Wow.
Okay. And so all the Marines that we had were already engaged at that point. But they're asking for 25,000 more. Well, you can't make them that fast. As already discussed, to make a guy like me, that's a pipeline of a year.
Yeah.
So what you do in those cases, you start looking to what was called prior service people. Okay, if you'd been in and now you're out, we want you back. Okay, and they were looking for guys that have been out for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years. Maybe 7 or 8 years. Maybe even 8 or 9 years. Okay?
Yes.
And maybe guys that were 36 or 37. Maybe even 38. But nobody thought that somebody would have the chutzpah, the gumption, the aggressiveness to say, yeah, I've been out for 18 years and I'm 46 years old. Here's my paperwork.
That's Terry coming in.
And so I was sworn back in June of 2006 because they needed Marines for the surge. And, they scrutinized the living daylights out of my record from the last time I was in.
Yes.
Okay, if there was any faux pas or black marks on that, that would have been a deal breaker. But as it was good paperwork, good record.
Yes.
And so the powers that be thought either they thought it'd be a great idea or they had a phenomenal sense of humor and said, sure, let's let this old guy come back in. But let's be crystal clear. I still had to do the 3-mile run and the 20 pull-ups. There's no exceptions on that. Doesn't matter how old you are.
Wow.
So that's the point. If you were not fit, because in that business, there's no forgiveness. There's no quarter asked. There's no quarter given. And look at it this way, Rob. The Marine Corps is an extremely young man's game. Statistically, 65% of the entire Marine Corps is under 25.
Wow.
Because it breaks you. The work and the early onset arthritis and things like that. So when I went back in, I was already 20 years older than the average Marine at that point.
Were you well received or?
the first day, no one could figure it out.
Oh, okay.
But then we went on a 3-mile run, and I beat a bunch of asses. And then we went to the pull-up bar, and I did my 20 pull-ups. And they're like, oh, I guess the old guy came to play.
Came to play.
And we started training, and then that was in June of 6. And there's a war going on. So it was constant training. We did not get the nod for Iraq until January, and then we go into from the training to intensive training, what we call PTP, or pre-deployment training plan. And we go into that, and we are all over wherever we could find a place to go shoot stuff and blow stuff up in the country.
Yeah,
we're traveling to train. And I mean, we did training for Iraq in Hawaii because we could get ranges there to train. We trained in Idaho. We trained in Louisiana. Whenever we could find places that we could go spend a month and blow stuff up and shoot stuff, we would go there. Because we're going to this little garden spot in Iraq. Maybe you've heard of it, Fallujah.
We've heard of it.
Yeah. So we end up, the year after I go back in, I end up as the second in command of here we're going to get into geek level nomenclature, of a light armored reconnaissance company. Okay. So it's a 180-man independent unit, and I'm the second in command of that in Fallujah.
So, Terry, we've never done this before live on air, so I feel compelled because we're just about to get into another exciting chapter. Can we ask you to come back for a part 2 to hear this? Because we definitely want to hear the rest of this.
We have barely scratched the surface. If you guys want me back, I will come back.
We want him back, right, Jim?
Right. Yes, definitely.
The audience. What does the audience say to this?
He hasn't even. Yeah. Do you want him back?
Yeah, they want. We'd love to have you back because we want to hear the entire story.
So we're just at the point where I'm getting on the plane to go to Iraq. So then we'll pick up with getting off the plane in Iraq, which is where the story really starts getting good.
It's a deal, sir.
All right, my friend.
Oh, kind of a long stretch there. So, if you'd like to see the second part, or maybe even part 2 of 3, with
I know he's a gift to gab. He loves and has plenty of stories. I've met Terry one other time before this, and it was very educational. I honestly, Terry, I don't know why you're not a teacher. You would have so much history to bring to a classroom.
Well, Jim, I like to think that I'm doing some teaching over a 50,000-watt radio station with an AM call sign of KMJ.
We haven't even touched the KMJ.
We haven't even got that. So respectfully, we may need a 3.0.
Yes,
yeah,
3.0.
No, and anything, conspiracy things. I love listening to you on the radio. I love hearing your opinion on what's going on.
We'll definitely need a 3.0 for that.
Right. Okay. All right. There we go.
So until then, if our viewers or audience would like to hear you on a regular basis, where can they find you?
I mean, I'm on KMJ 580 AM, 105.9 FM. I'm always on Tuesday afternoons, which is called Tuesdays with Terry.
Tuesdays with Terry.
And that's my regular. And then whenever somebody is typically out, I get called.
You get called in.
And so it's a lot of fun. But then, there's, 3 weeks ago, I did, 4 hours a day for the whole week. But Tuesday afternoons, KMJ 580 AM, 105.9 FM, Tuesdays with Terry.
Tuesdays with Terry. Terry's Slatic. I said it right.
You got it right. But can you get all the other portions?
Let's see if I can get it right. United States. Oh, wait. Retired.
Nope.
Help me out.
Major.
Oh, Major's first. I thought Major was after. Major Terry Slatic, United States Marine Corps, retired.
Microphone drop.
Got it.
Well done, Rob.
Thank you very much for being here. We'll be back with part 2. If you would like to see more of Terry's story and also tune in to his station, it will be Tuesdays with Terry on KMJ radio and also on 940 AM or PM.
580 AM, 105.9 FM.
FM. And the hours for that are
2 to 6.
2 to 6 p.m. on Tuesdays with Terry. Until next time, we love you guys. Thank you for tuning in. And it's love, peace, and chicken grease. It's RobLive, and we are out.